Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hi, guys. Okay, can I full screen this, or am I blocking too much? That's what I'm going to do, all right? And if you don't like it, I can just let me know in the comments, and I'll go back to not full screen. All right. Hi. Why wasn't preemptive like? I thought I preemptive liked it. History Matters, awesome channel. The channel I have reacted to for the longest amount of time. Actually, maybe Salmonella was my first video. Anyways, awesome channel. Why wasn't France carved up after Napoleon was defeated? I think I know this answer. And we'll see if I'm right. But wasn't it because the Napoleonic Wars wasn't exactly a nation against nation? It was more of a ton of French revolutionaries throwing over their monarch, Robespierreing him. And then other monarchs around Europe taking notice and being afraid that could happen to them, and so they have to squash it, and they end up putting Louis the somehow like the 15th or 14th, even though his dad was the 16th. Anyways, the king back in, and so I think it wasn't so much it was like more of a war against Napoleon and his revolution and just putting things back to normal than it was against France. So does that make sense? Am I sort of right, I think?
When you start a major European conflict and get defeated, you'll often lose territory as a result. In 1789, France looked like this. There was soon a lot of warring, one Napoleon, and just over 20...
What was that?
In 89, France looked and get like this.
What was it this? This right here.
There was soon a lot of warring, one Napoleon, and just over 25 years later, it looked like this. Not a whole lot different. And given the destruction and embarrassment that Europe's other powers suffered at the hands of France, why wasn't it punished more? Why didn't the victorious Allies carve up France? So, as many of you will know, France expanded rapidly in the wake of the French Revolution and peaked at this size. Naturally, once Napoleon was dealt with, France lost most of its gains, but was allowed to keep a few conquests.
I thought he reached all the way to like almost at Moscow. Why is this? And he was through Spain.
Naturally, once Napoleon was dealt with, France lost most of its gains but was allowed to keep a few conquests. That was until Napoleon returned. After his second defeat, France lost these territories further. The French border regions were then occupied, whilst the Congress of Vienna, called by the victorious powers to decide what was to be done with France and her allies...
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pause a lot, but what is it with this? So you have Austria, Prussia, Russia, and the UK. But then there's this area that's still French. So I'm wondering why this line is here. So the French are occupying France here?
And occupied, whilst the Congress of Vienna, called by the victorious powers to decide what was to be done with France and her allies, was ongoing. It was decided that France wouldn't be dismembered or have large swathes of land taken from it and given to anyone else. This wasn't exactly a unanimous decision. The coalition powers fell into two groups. The first was the Punish France camp. Is
that Jason? Welcome to Camp France Sucks, established 1815.
This included Prussia, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Savoy, and to a lesser extent Austria, whereas the other powers were in the let's not be hasty camp. This included the United Kingdom, Russia, and unsurprisingly, France itself. And this division was something that the French representatives led by Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand were able to use to France's advantage. Prussia gained this from the Congress. Its original hopes were for this, but Talleyrand was able to convince the British and the Russians to pressure Prussia to accept these lands along the Rhine, which notably included this piece of France proper. This kept the Russians and the Austrians happy.
This is when the crazy Russian guy...
the Rhine, which notably included this piece of France proper. This kept the Russians and the Austrians happy, gave Prussia some very rich land to the west, and was exactly what the French wanted. So why? Why willingly give up some of your own land? because the French were convinced the peace wouldn't last and that these lands would be hard for Prussia to maintain, meaning that in a future war France could win them for itself. This never happened, but it was an interesting idea. The Netherlands and Savoy were also countries which wanted extra lands from France. The Netherlands had hoped for this, but got told that their annexation of the former Austrian Netherlands and rule over Luxembourg would be enough, so shut up. Savoy, despite not doing anything, was given this land at the behest of Austria.
Savoy. Man, I gotta remember that. Savoy. Savoy is a cultural historical region in Western Alps. I want to learn about that. Isn't that the Danish flag?
Who was busy trying to create an Italian confederation much like the German one, which conveniently it would also run. Except that the whole Italian confederation thing fell flat, but it was at least a good effort. Everyone went along with this because the Netherlands and Savoy were supposed to be mid-sized buffer states to keep France contained. And so the only other state that wanted French land was Switzerland, which had hoped to be given all of this. They only got this connecting Geneva to the rest of the country.
Switzerland?
And the reason was that they had no major powers on their side since none of them would gain anything from an expanded Switzerland. And so what about the rest? Well, for the UK, Russia and to an extent Austria.
Is that Blucher? Like, who is this supposed to be? Blucher? France. It's sort of like, so France. I mean Switzerland. It's like, so Switzerland, you want this area? Well, is it just going to be taken from you? Because Switzerland. Wow, my first time even hearing about Switzerland, talking about the Napoleonic Wars.
From an expanded Switzerland. And so what about the rest? Well, for the UK, Russia and to an extent Austria, there was one primary concern.
Poland?
The balance of power and maintaining monarchical government in Europe. Austria wanted a strong France to counter Prussia and Britain. Russia wanted a strong France to counter Europe. Austria wanted a strong France to counter Prussia and Britain. Russia wanted a strong France to counter Prussia, Austria and Britain just didn't want to have to deal with the continent.
Classic Britain. It's like what we're like now. Actually, we don't leave people alone, never mind.
Anymore. And carving up France meant that no one would get what they wanted. Because if France lost a lot of territory, its recently restored monarchy would probably be overthrown again. It's also the reason why during Napoleon's return, the coalition didn't declare war on France, but on Napoleon.
This is so interesting. Oh, on Napoleon. I was kind of right there.
During Napoleon's return, the coalition didn't declare war on France, but on Napoleon.
I was right there, but there's something super important. I forgot it.
Because if France lost a lot of territory, it's
right. So, even if it wasn't a war just against the French, just against Napoleon and against France, and then they took it over, none of these guys would want a truly weakened France, because then it could enable one of them to take them over and then become the big problem. And so it's like a complicated game of, like, make sure everyone gets something, make sure France isn't too weak, because no matter what, France is a developed, highly populated place, and they can't just be left to be taken over or whatever. So, interesting.
Recently restored monarchy would probably be overthrown again. It's also the reason why during Napoleon's return, the coalition didn't declare war on France, but on Napoleon. The restored King of France was an ally against Napoleonic and Republican ideals, and thus stealing all of his land afterwards wouldn't have been cool. Ally against Napoleon,
I'm rewinding.
Coalition didn't declare war on France, but on Napoleon. The restored King of France was an ally against Napoleonic and Republican ideals, and thus stealing all of his land afterwards wouldn't have been cool. In the end, it was the coalition's suspicions of each other that meant that France needed to remain strong and unified, meaning that unlike in the wake of other great wars in Europe,
This picture reminds me of the Allies and the USSR right after World War II dealing with Germany. Like, yeah, we have to punish them and divide it up, but now Germany's not a threat, now you're a threat.
Meant that France needed to remain strong and unified, meaning that unlike in the wake of other great wars in Europe, major territorial losses were off the table. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a special thanks to my patrons, James Bisonet, Kelly...
he didn't say thank you for watching. I always say thank you for making.
Moneymaker, Sky Chappelle, Corsho Wolf, Jerry Lambdin, Jordan Longley, Adam Stalter, Marcus Arsner, YN Hockey, Spencer Lightfoot, Rod D. Martin, Words About Books podcast, Captain Sidog, Gustav Swan, Marvin Cassow, Camoon Yoon, Winston Kaywood, Boogly Woogly, Daniel Tabian, Miss Izette, Matthew Shipley.
We're their African Crusaders. Really awesome video, guys.
When we think of the Crusades, we
hope you're all doing well. Chin up. If not, you'll be good soon. See ya.
think of kings, knights, and peasants from places like France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire marching to the
Yeah, I'm gonna watch this. Bye, guys.